Hi, everyone, and welcome to the first set of functional panels during Google's VetNet Career Week. I'm Nating Leaf, a Google Cloud Culture and Transformation Leader, as well as a proud U.S. Air Force veteran and a current military spouse. Over the next hour, I'll be talking with 4 Googlers in business roles to discuss their journeys, their recommendations for finding similar roles, and what day-to-day life and expectations are like in these functions. When many think of Google, they sometimes assume we only hire engineers or those who can code. This panel will demonstrate this is not the case. Through hearing their stories, we'll uncover helpful insights to inform your career decisions. Let's get started and have our panelists introduce themselves. I'll ask each of you to share your background, what team you work on, and a high-level explanation of what you do on a daily basis. Bill, why don't we start with you?
Hi, my name is Bill Ostland. I'm the Global Security Manager for YouTube and a proud Army vet. I transitioned into the role of Global Security Manager, which is really responsible for all of YouTube's physical infrastructure and to address the physical threats that approach our San Bruno campus and 20 campuses across the globe.
Great, thanks, Bill. Camille, let's go to you next.
Hi, I'm Camille Mcclure. I work with Google HR, working on organizational design, structure, consultation, team development, a lot of different functions.
Awesome, thanks, Camille. Sybil?
Hi, I'm Sybil Ann Strimbu. I'm an 11-year Googler, a legal specialist, and civilian ally. On a daily basis, I help support Google's efforts to improve communication services and devices, to maintain an industry-leading physical network, and to shape and satisfy communications-related regulatory requirements.
Great, thanks. Lindsay, why don't you bring us home?
Awesome. Hi, everyone. My name is Lindsay Hafner. I support our staffing efforts in tech here at Google. This is across a variety of different functions. So I have the pleasure of being able to hire for software engineers, product managers, technical program managers across all of our different Google product areas, Google Assistant, YouTube, search, you name it. I probably support it here within the US.
Awesome. Well, let's learn a little bit more about your backgrounds and how you got to the roles that you're in today. So I'll pose this first question of what was the path that got you to where you are? And what was the moment that you realized this was the right role for you, whether that was in the hiring process or once you got started? And maybe we can go in the same order that we did our intros. So Bill, why don't we start with you and go in that same circle?
Thanks, Yating. So YouTube security was born out of a tragedy that occurred in April of 18. I received a call while I was on active duty and was asked to apply for the position. After that first interview, I was actually deemed overqualified for the position, was not hired, but was subsequently called back a few weeks later when a new position opened up that Google felt I was qualified for. As I got here, I think the most interesting thing about Google is many people in Google expected this to be a real cultural shift for me. Likewise, my peers that I spent 13,044 days in the Army with thought that it had to be an incredible, difficult transition. And it really wasn't. It was the ideas of respect and empathy are prevalent in both the Army, I found in the Army and in Google. So that's how I ended up here.
Great, thank you for sharing that, Bill. And that resonates with me as well, coming from the Air Force to Google. Those 3 respects really play to the Air Force core values too. And so that's been a nice part of the transition here. Sybil Ann, share your story with us.
Sure. So my path to Google began 2 years before Google even existed. My initial plan was to work in a museum as a STEM-related curator or educator. In the meantime, I was working as a vehicle safety researcher at a very quirky nonprofit in Washington, D.C. Because I wasn't earning enough to purchase a home, I decided that I would take a job that I saw posted in the Washington Post newspaper for an entry-level telecom paralegal. I landed the position. I worked at that firm for about 18 months. I then moved to a smaller law firm where I worked for about 10 years. Google was a client of the small law firm, and after having a particularly crummy day at the law firm, I searched online for open Google positions. The next day, I was chatting with the Google recruiter, and the rest is history.
You may be one of the most interesting people here at Google. That is a fascinating background. I have other questions for you that I'll save for post-panel. Camille, share your story, please.
Yeah, I joined the military out of college, and I spent 8 years as an intelligence officer. I traveled a lot. Really loved my time, but my husband wasn't in the military, and so it made it really difficult for us to stay in. So we made the complicated decision for me to leave. After 8 years, it was really, really hard to make the transition, at least initially. I moved into a medical device sales job for about 6 months, and to be honest, I hated it. So I ended up looking around, and a friend of mine worked at Google as a recruiter. So I applied into a role, and I got it. And I had no idea how to do recruiting. It was a huge learning curve for me. But it taught me a lot of lessons about transferable skill sets, and really what it meant to use the things that I learned in the military in a role that felt very, very different. So I did that for a couple of years, and then I ended up moving into a manager position where I oversaw teams hiring into Google. And I did that for multiple years at Google, I think 4 or 5 years. And so for the last 6 months or so, I've been working in HR as an HR professional, overseeing organizational design, structure, consulting with senior leaders. What I've really seen in terms of the skills that I've applied, team development, growth of leaders, really resiliency and how we apply that, especially over the last 2 years. These are all things that come from my time in the military. And I really feel like they set me apart just in how I can navigate the complexity of problem sets. So, yeah.
Fantastic. I was Intel as well. I think that's one of the other fun things about Google. You can find people that you have connections with and are parallel pathing with in various ways. So thank you for sharing that. Lindsay, how did you make your way here?
Well, first, I just have to say, Camille, I love that you had mentioned when you stepped into recruiting, you had no idea anything about it, because that tends to be the case for a lot of us recruiters. So, you know, I actually went to college for a psychology degree. I had interest in becoming a psychologist of some sort. And, you know, in my senior year, I realized I don't really know if I'm ready to go and pursue a master's right now and really go down that path as I originally thought. I always joke that I don't know if at 18 we should be responsible for making our life decision of what we want to be when we grow up, so to speak. And so with that, I had some friends who had graduated and had pursued recruiting. I knew that, you know, you can make some good money out of it. They always said, if you're money motivated, was the phrase that they'd give, then, you know, you could be successful. And so I said, I guess I could be money motivated. Next thing you know, I ended up at a recruiting agency. That taught me a lot. Similar to Camille, I had no recruiting experience, but I learned what it meant to just provide that support to candidates through the recruiting process, how to partner with clients on, you know, the both as an account manager, but also as an advisor. And that then brought me to a financial organization in which I really learned how to be more of develop more empathetic skills, because when candidates are going through that journey, it's a life change, right? And so having that impact on someone really changes everything for them. So really being able to lean in, understand their experiences, what it is they're looking for, and actually make that connection to their future job, where they spend the majority of the time during the week, was really important. And that's where I found that, hey, I'm pretty good at this and really enjoy it, just from, you know, a personal perspective. And my husband, current active duty in the Marines, so I am a military spouse. At the time, we were in Virginia and he was being stationed in Hawaii. So while we were in the process of me determining how I would continue my work in Hawaii, a Google recruiter reached out on LinkedIn about a recruiting opportunity in Colorado. And that's actually where we wanted to end up long-term. So we made the choice to do long distance while he pursued his time in the military. And I ended up moving to our Boulder office in Colorado and haven't looked back since. To be able to support staffing for a company like Google is incredible. Google does incredible things, but it all starts with our people. So I'm excited to talk about it a bit more today.
Great, thank you. And I think one of the silver linings of the pandemic is Google is offering a bit more flexibility with locations for military spouses. I know that is very, very important. And it's part of the reason I actually was able to land the role that I'm in currently and be based out of the DC area where my husband is stationed currently. So just keep that in mind for everybody listening to the panel. There is more flexibility on the horizon. So one thing that a couple of you mentioned was that this was a big shift for you, or an opportunity that you jumped into with not a whole lot of experience or depth previously. So for Camille and Lindsay, I'm curious what your biggest recommendation to veterans or military spouses would be with limited experience and an interest in coming into roles like yours.
I'll jump in. I would say have faith in yourself. I transitioned through a role before I came to Google, and it really made me question a lot of the decisions that I made and whether I could apply myself out of the military. It's been 8 years there, learning what it meant to be an officer and what it meant to be in the military, which is a whole life. And so was there a life for me after that I could really feel as included? And so that I would say just start with having faith that there's other opportunities, that there's other options. And then 2, the life lessons that you go through cannot be replicated. The things that you experience, the ways in which the military challenges you in some of the best possible ways, and very, very hard ways too, are not things that others naturally go through. And so you learn some really complicated things that are very transferable, and you'll be able to navigate a lot of complexity. So I think that's where I'd start. Lindsay?
Thanks, Camille. Those are great pieces of advice. I would say you have to start somewhere. It may not be in the job that you really are passionate about. It may not be a job description that you're like, wow, that hits to my core, right? But it's about stepping your foot in the door outside of your comfort zone in a position that's going to help build your skills in any kind of way, shape, or form. Once you're able to do that, you begin to slowly learn what you like and what you don't like. And then you're able to properly kind of pivot the career trajectory that you'd like to pursue moving forward. But you can't get there and you won't have those options until you've been able to really build those skills. So as I mentioned, recruiting wasn't something that I was personally seeking out, but I knew that I needed to be able to gain skills, and I needed a job, let's call it what it is here, right? After college to pay those student loans. And from that, I learned, okay, I'm detail oriented. I am a people person. I can build a great rapport with people. I can build trust, right? And those are all soft skills that can be applicable to a lot of different roles. But if I don't have that experience to put on my resume, then I won't get an interview, right? So just taking that leap, starting somewhere and trusting that it's okay, that this may not be what I'd really love to do long-term. It's going to at least be that stepping stone that will help get me there is my biggest piece of recommendation.
All right, well, let's broaden the conversation here a little bit and talk about some general tips to transition from the military into roles like what we have at Google. So Bill, why don't you share either a general tip around what has helped you or what you've seen has helped others, or anything that surprised you in the journey from military to civilian life?
Yeah, thanks, Yating. A little bit different than the other panelists is I spent my whole adult life in the military. From the time I was 17, I'll just say for almost 36 years. So what I had to come to grips with, and I know there will be a lot of retirees watching this, is the civilian world really doesn't understand retiree. If you're retired, why would you be transitioning, or why would you be looking for a job? So I advise people to accept this is a transition, whether you're retiring or leaving after 2, 3, 4, 8 years. It is a transition. It's just another leg on the journey. And all these great tips that you've heard prior to this about finding the role, deciding, what you want to do, what you will do, and what you won't do. And is there a location, where you want to live, where you will live, and where you won't live? And is there a caveat, like compensation? I won't live in California unless the compensation is X. And then you've got to understand compensation. In the military, you know what you're going to make plus or minus 2% every year of your career. You got to understand total compensation, and the recruiters might be able to talk about that a little bit more, but that's something very different than in the military. So that's what I'd suggest. And again, really willing to talk to any retiree that is in here and talk to you about transitioning vice retiring.
That's fantastic. Thank you, Bill. And I know that the compensation opportunities, especially at places like Google, introduce a level of complexity as well as a level of excitement. So that's a really, really valuable tip. Ask lots of questions and don't be shy about asking questions when it comes to that topic. Sybil Ann, I'm curious to hear your perspective on this topic, knowing that you're a civilian ally and perhaps have seen folks try to make the transition or maybe supported folks as they transition from military to civilian.
Absolutely. So my first suggestion is make sure you know everything you can about the company that you're looking at. Don't just fire off your resume. Make sure you know what that company does, good and bad. Make sure you know the people that are involved. In my instance, it was back when you mailed resumes. My husband actually called the law firm to find out who the hiring partner would be. We did that so that they couldn't trace it to me necessarily. So I came in armed knowing exactly who the hiring partner was. During that interview, they actually said, "Have you ever been to the Federal Communications Commission's reference room?" And I said, "No, but I'm going right after this interview." What I did was I took the whole day off for the interview, had the interview, met with everyone, got in a cab, went straight to the reference room and sat and watched all the paralegals work. Then I was able to say to the hiring partner, "Look at this. I went, took my time, figured this out. I know what they do. I can do this." My other recommendation is to consider other law firm positions. It's not unusual for law firm receptionists and other support positions to be promoted internally. Also, law firms often hire inexperienced temporary or contract paralegals for short-term document review work, and that is a great way to get your foot in the door and be noticed. Finally, some people will pursue paralegal certificates. However, I don't actually know any paralegals who have taken this route.
Great, thanks for all of those tips. That's super helpful. Lindsay, I'm also curious to get your perspective, given where you sit in the organization, and perhaps if there are any tips you can share generally about what you see people do well as they navigate the hiring process, or potentially common missteps that folks transitioning from the military might make.
Absolutely. It's a great question because, just as we heard here, both from Bill and Sybil, there's so many things that you want to keep in mind when you're making that transition, and all of which are so important. But the one thing I will say that is so common that I see both from transitioning veterans, but also just general applicants that may be civilians, are applying to roles when a candidate actually doesn't meet the minimum qualifications listed on the job opening. And so, you're spending so much time, right, looking for these opportunities and applying, filling out those lengthy applications. You might as well make the most of that time, right? So by ensuring that you're not only meeting those minimum qualifications for the roles that you're applying to, but also ensuring that your resume explicitly speaks to those minimum qualifications is absolutely key. And the reason for that is because you can imagine how many folks are also applying to the same type of job that you are, right? And so as recruiters, when we're reviewing resumes, yes, each and every application is reviewed, at least within Google, I can speak for that firsthand, but we are moving pretty fast, right? And so if we are looking at your application for one particular opening, and we're not really seeing how your experience actually aligns with the bare minimum that our hiring managers need to see to consider you for the roles, you might not get a call, right? And that may not mean that you don't have the qualifications, but it may just simply mean that it wasn't stated in a way that we can really understand, right? Just simply how it may be written on a resume. And so ensuring that, again, that your resume is able to speak to those minimum qualifications. What I recommend to folks is craft your resume and then share it with, a friend that they may know you're in the military, but they might not really understand, right? And then get their 2 cents. Hey, do you understand what's listed on my experience and how it may correlate with this job description? And show them an example, right, of the job you're applying to. If they don't really understand, there's a good chance the recruiter looking at it or hiring manager may not either. And again, you want to get in front of this firsthand, right, prior to submitting that application, because it's time consuming and it can be kind of draining going through that interview process and application process. So by taking that step, you're helping yourself out a long way. And then my other recommendation is just around behavioral interviews. I think that it can be really difficult for anyone, regardless of your experience, to talk to a stranger about what your day-to-day work may look like. At the end of the day, they're not in your shoes, right? So simply talking about what your day-to-day responsibilities may look like can sound a little foreign to them. And so by simply Googling sample behavioral interview questions, and then again, picking a friend, a civilian ally who may not really know what the military is, and having them ask you those behavioral interview questions, go back to them afterwards and say, hey, did that make sense? Was there anything you maybe didn't understand? Your responses should make sense to a stranger. And so by at least practicing that ahead of time, that will not only help you kind of build that skill on how to speak to your military experience to someone that may not be as fluent with the military and what your occupation may have been, but it's also going to set you up for success in a lot of the different interviews that you'll likely end up having.
I hope everybody listening wrote down everything Lindsay just said, because those things are incredibly valuable. They are things that I did with my cohort of vets transitioning through my MBA program, and I think they were game changers. So listen to Lindsay and do everything she just told you to do. Camille, I have a building question for you, given where you sit in the organization, how you support leaders in the business. I'm curious, from your observations in your role, if you've noticed anything that really stands out from military leaders to the business leaders that you work with, and if there might be any, I don't know if it's hidden superpowers or hidden capabilities that folks in the military might not realize they have that are relevant to the business world, given everything you do to create organizational and team effectiveness.
It's a great question. I think I would ground it in structural problem solving. The military has a foundation of how you approach solving a problem or approaching a complex situation or scenario. And the way in which it breaks down each component of that is just not trained in depth outside of the military in the same way. And I think that no matter what you do in the military, the foundational training you're going to get around that will really shine as you go through your civilian life. And just being around how people think and communicate in the military can really give you access to that. So in transitioning into roles like this, when I experience somebody who's been in the military and they're working through small or large problems, whether it's a day-to-day scenario with a smaller team or a globally complex situation with a lot of different components, a lot of the same criterion and components of how you break down that problem, I see really reflected in what they learned in the military. And it can illuminate a lot of things that even somebody who went through an elaborate MBA program or has a complex degree won't necessarily have it trained with the same level of experience. The other thing is the stakes are often higher in the military, not to diminish the stakes outside of the military for sure. There's a lot of people and their livelihoods on the line. But the stakes are a little bit different. And so the way you look at applying that, the way you look at your team can be a little bit different. And I think that trains you to look at organizational design, and look at the complexity of both every single individual and how much you care for every single individual within that organization, but also the health and welfare of the whole organization in a way that the businesses often don't train leaders to do. So that infrastructure is just absolutely fantastic.
I love both of those tips, and I think they're quite applicable to military spouses as well. Military spouses have to deal with a bit of structured problem solving as you navigate moves with or without kids, and as you try to juggle a career on top of that with a lot of unpredictability, as well as putting people first. I think the military is really deeply ingrained in folks to put humans first as best possible, and that carries through as being a differentiator in the civilian world.
I couldn't agree more.
Well, I also wanted to touch on something that I know a lot of veterans, at least ones that I've worked with and transitioning, have wrestled with, and that's the concept of networking and depending on other folks to navigate the civilian world. One of the questions that is on the panel list is, have mentors assisted you on your journey? I'd like to pose that more broadly to see if any of you have a story about a mentor or somebody you networked with who helped you here, or more broadly, any networking you might have did that made the difference for you to get an opportunity at Google. So I'll just open that up.
I'm happy to jump in here. So when I initially joined Google, I had shared a little bit that, my husband and I had made the decision to be long distance for a bit. And so I moved across the country. I sold our house, did the cross country drive with our pets. Fortunately, no kids at the time, or else I can't imagine how I would have done it. And started a new job in a place I knew no one. And of course, my husband was, the states away, time zones away as well. So it was really hard in the beginning within my journey at Google. And on top of that, the initial role that I actually stepped into within the company ended up really not aligning with what I thought I had signed up for. And I was in a really tough position because at that point, I'm like, I'm reflecting on all those decisions I had just made, very big ones, impacting our lives, and didn't really know what to do. Then an internal opportunity came up, and I reached out directly to a leader within our organization. I believe she was in a director position at the time, and she is a veteran herself. And I just shared my personal experience as not only a military spouse, but also just my experience supporting different diversity initiatives within staffing and ensuring that, we're making a better organization for all by ensuring that we're being representative of our user base. And by that email and simply personalizing it and, trying to make that connection with this point of contact, the next thing you know, as soon as her and I met one-on-one together, she was already taking the initiatives and figuring out how she could help me transition into this new opportunity within Google. And again, this was shortly after joining. Certainly don't recommend this being the path that you take, but it also goes to show that our internal mobility is incredible. But the reason I want to share this story is because, one, the veteran network in our community here, both with veterans, military spouses, and civilian allies, it's incredible. But the same thing goes for the external veteran community, right? And those relationships you're able to make. You never know when you're just empathetic and vulnerable and sharing your own story, where that can take you. And so I would say lead with that. If I went into it with perhaps a big ego or, a little bit more aggressive, I'm not quite sure that it would have been as seamless of a transition. But again, just really showing that vulnerability and connecting with folks that you can relate to, that's not only going to help build your own community within whatever organization or town you may be in, but it's also going to help just networking in general for you, not only in the short term, but long term as well.
I actually have a similar experience. When I joined Google, I was an admin assistant on the policy team. For the first year, the position was a great fit. The second year, it was not as good of a fit. The third year, it was no longer a good fit for me. I let that be known. I talked to people to see what I could do to either improve the position or find another position. And I actually was given a 5-minute opportunity to pitch a new position to a vice president who happened to be visiting Google DC that day. On the fly, I had to pitch him that I wanted to be a paralegal for the telecom team that was going to be newly formed. I pitched it and I got the position. That is something you always have to be open to, those kind of opportunities, be ready to leap. And then the other thing is, I'm paying that forward. Any veteran who needs help with that kind of work, reach out to me. Reach out to me in social media, reach out to me on LinkedIn. We can chat about it, discuss how you can maybe create that position that's right for you.
I love that. That is fantastic. And everyone should take Sibyl-Ann up on that opportunity, because you never know what's underneath the surface, and other opportunities are definitely out there beyond what you might see. What about Camille or Bill? Any tips or stories about how networking has been beneficial to your experiences?
I can go. I was referred into Google by a veteran, somebody that I'd known from my very beginning of my days in the military, and we'd stayed in touch the entire time. He'd started at the company before I did, and so when he found out that I was not really enjoying the job that I got out of the military and was really questioning the life decision that I'd made in leaving, he said, "I really love it here. I think you should consider a role." It felt like a big step backward because I'd been leading teams for 8 years. And so he really helped me understand what it would mean to make the change, and talked me through a lot of those things. So it really helps to have somebody to just bounce ideas off of and to think through what you're weighing. And to reference the earlier comments about like, what are your priorities? He helped me think about my priorities and what they would really look like if I moved into this new role. And since then, I've had at least one other role at Google. I've moved roles multiple times, but at least one other role at Google was a referral from a veteran. And so really leveraging that network, unashamedly leveraging that network is really, really valuable. And I would encourage you all to do that and reach out anytime to me as well.
Yeah, a couple of things I'd add is, in the military, we put such a premium on leadership, and many times that's what veterans lead with is all this leadership opportunity. But something that I've highlighted to veterans of all ranks and experience is, however many repetitions you have at leadership, you've had many times that at being a great teammate. And in this environment, I think being a great teammate is more important than being a great leader. And every day our directors and VPs have opportunities to lead, but they have many more times the opportunity to be a great teammate. Likewise with us, this volunteering to reach out, I get reached out to routinely on LinkedIn, and do the same thing, maximize the VetNet community within Google to find opportunities or share tips. The top 10 tips that I have for veterans. Again, I largely focus, not entirely, but largely focus on retirees, which have a little different journey and are in a little different station in life. But I would say, people's reputation really matters. I think Camille just highlighted she was called by a veteran. I was called by a veteran that I'd worked with overseas, and he said, "Hey, I need to stand up a YouTube security task force. Could you do this? Oh, by the way, you're not getting any headcount. You got to figure out how to get people to work with you, not for you." And I'm like, perfect. The last 10 years of my career was not, really having people work so much directly for me, but getting large organizations to work with me. And I see that in Google every day. It's less, in fact, it's very hard to find Those of us on the screen know it's very hard to find the org chart in here. There's a secret to it a little bit. So there's not the large horse blanket org chart that makes it very clear. And that means we do have to network every single day and just kind of ask our teammates and friends, hey, who would know something about this topic? And it trickles through, and you kind of figure it out. You build your network, and through that, your reputation permeates. But you almost also might pick up a mentor that's like, hey, that's a good way of doing something, and then you have an opportunity to post a new role and go in another direction.
Those are really powerful points, Bill. I love that point on you've been a teammate even more than you've been a leader. And it's so true in the civilian world. I transitioned initially from the military into consulting, and everybody talked about managing up. I was like, what is managing up? I don't understand this concept. And it's another way of being a teammate and exuding influence and getting people to do things for you, with you, without having a direct line of control or line of sight to them. And it's such a valuable skill set. I will say for me as well, my network really paid off. I had somebody that I worked with in consulting refer me for my current job. I wasn't even looking to leave my last role, and the opportunity came up. He knew my background and what I was really passionate about, and threw my hat in the ring for me on my behalf. And so I too am willing to pay it forward. So folks who are listening to this, feel free to reach out. I do prioritize vets and military spouses on LinkedIn, so you do tend to get a little bit of extra love. Take advantage of that. I'm going to play on something that Bill has subtly mentioned a couple of times. He's been doing a little bit of myth busting. And I'm interested to hear from the group if there are any myths that they would bust or misconceptions that a lot of people might have about working at Google in general.
Yeah, I just follow on as other people, because this is a topic I talk about all the time. Is, again, I think the parallels to Google and military service are much more clean than people in Google or people in the military would ever believe, or in some would ever want to believe. But when I was, the last job I had was the director of military instruction at West Point. I worked with phenomenal young people every single day, empirically, some of the best in the country and the globe with our international students. In the older people, here we call them Greglers, Gray Googlers, part of a proud group I'm part of. We had some of those running around West Point too. They were normally permanent professors, and they brought a very special skill set to the younger people. Well, that's kind of similar to Google. You have some of the brightest minds on the planet from all over, diverse cultures working here. They have kind of shared purpose and goals, and the idea that information democratizes the world. I mean, that's pretty inspiring. Google mission or Google principle, or what, it's something in there. Information democratizes the world, and I heard that on my first day in Noogler, and I'm like, doggone, I've been trying to democratize the world in another form for a long time with modicum of success, maybe, I don't know, but let's try information. And as I went forward from day one in Noogler training, seeing that on to today, only 2.5 years in civil, that I see parallels every single day. So if you're afraid of leaving the military culture, I think if you go in with a positive attitude and eyes wide open, you can find positive cultures or like cultures. And not everybody liked the Army culture or the military culture, but you can find the parallels that you liked if you look for them. Likewise, if you put on negative Nelly glasses, you may never find it. So that's what I'd share.
One myth that I'd like to bust is that soft skills do not matter in tech. That's absolutely untrue. Great employees are creative, adaptable, emotionally intelligent. It is very important. Obviously, you need the hard or technical skills, but you need those soft skills.
That's a great one. And I was thinking about Lindsay, I'm guessing you would +1 that coming from the hiring team and you also mentioned it with the behavioral piece of the interviews, making sure that people are well prepared for that. Are there any other myths that you would bust, Lindsay, or would you just really reinforce what Sybil was saying?
Yeah, I think Sybil and Bill touched on pretty big ones. Clearly this session in particular is business roles at Google. So I hope that this busts the myth that you don't have to be technical to work at Google. So just recognizing that. And with that, there are so many types of jobs here. I couldn't even name half of them if I tried. So, what I would encourage too is just when you are seeking out opportunities, plug in a couple different keywords on our career site. And, what you can do is by doing that repetitively, that's going to begin to just help you understand, okay, these types of roles have the types of responsibilities I would have interest in doing at Google. And so that way, even if you may not meet the minimum qualifications now, you're setting the expectation for yourself of what you need to work towards, right? In order to apply to those positions in the future with us. So no, you don't have to be technical to work at Google. But if you don't meet even the non-technical qualifications, you can absolutely get there, but just set that goal for yourself. It's certainly attainable, and many of the roles, recruiting included, did not require, experience for my initial job stepping into it. And so just recognize, I guess the myth busting there is some roles, any of us can be taught those responsibilities, but again, it's really just about believing in yourself and taking that first step to build those skills.
Love that. Camille, what about you? Any myths you'd like to bust?
I would really reinforce what's already been said. I learned most of what I have in the military from on the job. And I'd say the same is true for Google. The formal education that you might get is really, really valuable in establishing foundations. But I'll tell you, most of the experience that I've gone through that's where I've received the majority of my lessons. And so the complexity of navigating the military and all the things you might have to do if you've deployed or wherever you've worked. And if you've been an Army spouse or a military spouse and you've provided that level of support and you've navigated that level of complexity, those are all transferable skill sets. And then additionally, when you're in Google, you're going to learn a lot on the job as well. And so the ability to learn is the skill you're going to transfer. The number of times I've had to look something up, I assumed somebody else already knew and they didn't. Because there's not an easy answer. There wasn't in the military, and there certainly isn't at Google. Infinite curiosity, learning on the job, it feels exactly the same between the two.
Yeah, comes back to a growth mindset. And
Sure.
Google is useful even when you work at Google, or especially when you work at Google. Lots of things to look up. Well, I think we have time for one more question. So this last one I'll pose is a little bit of a meaty one. So I'll ask it and give you each a moment to think about it, but would love to hear your respective answers. So I would love to hear your perspective on what it looks like to thrive at Google, whether you want to answer that broadly in terms of what you see others doing or what that means to you personally.
I'll just say, I think to thrive at Google in the role I'm in is about commitment. In the military, many of us transitioned units every 2 or 3 years, and you had to embrace that transition. But if you were to be successful and a great teammate, you would not hearken back to the last unit you were in, but come in and try to contribute to the new unit. As Camille said, the intellectual curiosity, Sybil talked about emotional IQ. Hey, be aware of the new unit and be committed to that as much as you were to the last unit you left and loved. embrace the new one, learn to love the ones you're with. And again, I think it allows you to be positive and be a great teammate by harken back. One thing that won't work here, and I don't do it, and I've got a lot of veterans, is, you know, we'll certainly get together and talk about military stuff, but we don't develop our own veteran lingo and try to off-put other members of the team. So embrace the ones you're with, be positive, use all those transferable skills, intellectual curiosity, emotional IQ. And I think anybody who's fortunate to join this company or another like company will be very happy post-service.
For me, thriving at Google is taking advantage of everything that Google has to offer. You know, on any given day, you may find me preparing an application for an FCC license to construct undersea cables. I might be applying for authority to conduct experimental testing on radio spectrum, but I also might be volunteering. We are able to volunteer during our normal business hours. And in addition to veterans, one of my passions is animals. And I actually, a silver lining of COVID is I befriended a beef steer. There's only one reason for beef steer to exist. I fell in love with him, gave him the name Norton, purchased him, and then took him to a sanctuary where I now will be volunteering to raise him. These are some of the opportunities that you have at Google that makes it an amazing place.
That's such a personal question to discuss what it means to thrive. And I don't think I've ever met anybody at Google who'd answer that same question exactly as I would. And so I appreciate this panel. For me, it's certainly about, there's this entire concept of work-life balance. And I think anyone who's been in the military knows there's no such thing as balance. But it's a matter of fitting all the puzzle pieces together. And what Google does is it gives you so many ways to draw your own puzzle. There's so many ways to fit all of the different components of your work with your benefits, with your life. And you can draw that in so many unique and complicated ways. And the military didn't necessarily let you draw that for yourself. And so not that you can't make it work, but the military, it's not designed to be as tailorable. And I think that Google really, really lets you take the pen and create the puzzle that works best for you, and however you want that to look. So I think that's what thriving at Google has meant, is drawing the puzzle for myself.
That was I love the way that you correlated that, Camille, the puzzle and drawing it yourself. And that, I guess, bringing us to a close kind of ties into what I would say just personally has helped me with my own success within Google. And that's been being comfortable, thriving, and ambiguity. Something that I know is very much so applicable to the military life and careers. And with that, you know, we've touched on this a little bit throughout the cadence of this conversation today, but within Google, every problem's complex. It's very rare that when you're tackling a problem that there will be a straightforward answer somewhere, or a guide, right, to check off steps 1, 2, and 3, and then success is at the end, right? So with that, it's so important that you are comfortable with just figuring it out and networking and learning, right? Just being open to learn, because you never know what resources you may be able to identify. And after connecting with 1 or 2 folks, that may take you down a whole nother rabbit hole of something we haven't thought of for the project and problem you're trying to tackle. So that curiosity, again, that was mentioned earlier on, but also just that comfortability to work in the unknown. You know, without that comfortability, it may result in you just kind of sitting there, right? And not knowing where to go or who to turn to. And well, that's going to have a lot of impacts on a number of things. And so being able to just thrive when you don't know, figuring out how you can find out, right? And just taking that step. That's naturally going to build so many skills in itself, because a few years down the line, you're going to know a whole lot more people than you initially knew, for one. And then therefore, it's likely going to help you figure it out that much quicker moving on as well.
Fantastic. Embrace the ones you're with and the unknown. When you can do both of those, then you can figure it all out. Well, we're out of time. Thank you, Sybil, Lindsay, Camille, and Bill, for the wonderful stories and the helpful tips. I definitely learned a lot, and I'm sure everyone on this panel did, and I hope they'll take us up on being part of their network as they try to navigate their transitions or their new opportunities. So thanks again for participating on this panel. To our viewers, if you're interested in learning more about Google, our roles, our opportunities, or you'd like to review our career readiness materials, please check out the resources tab on the Google VetNet Career Week landing page. Following this, we'll have 3 more functional panels starting at 11 a.m. Pacific, 2 p.m. Eastern. You can join the live stream to hear from more panelists in different business roles, including sales, marketing, policy and communications, project management, and finance. If you're interested in engineering roles or non-engineering technical roles, you can view those panels on our Career Week landing page. All of our functional and industry panels will be recorded for you to view later at go.co/vets if you missed anything. Thanks again for watching.